Do you remember the show, The $6 Million Man, starring Lee Majors as the bionic Steve Austin? No? Ugh. I think I just dated myself again. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. $6 million can't even clean up a medium-impact natural disaster these days, especially if it wipes through a major metro like Calgary, Alberta. One did in the year 2020, and it cost a metric ton. This day in weather history. According to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and they would know these numbers, the hailstorm that hit Calgary on June 13th racked up over $1.2 billion in insured damages, registering it as the fourth costliest natural disaster in Canada's history. Wait a minute, back it up. A fourth? At over $1 billion? I'll get into it. The storm hit northeast Calgary, Airdrie, and Rocky View County the hardest. Many people in Calgary have had their homes completely wrecked by this. Their livelihoods had been taken away, and even those who were fully insured were still facing very large out-of-pocket deductibles. It was reported that, at the time, many of those affected the worst, who had lost the most, still were out thousands of dollars that day for an expense that could not just be put off to a later, more convenient date. Now, remember when this happened? June of 2020. Sound familiar? It was only 4 months into the economy and soul-crushing COVID-19 pandemic, and in the area of Calgary where the pinch was the harshest, was home to a large immigrant population of people still very new to Canada. They were already facing financial hardships tied to the pandemic and the more long-standing oil price crash. It was a triple whammy. In all, it damaged at least 70,000 homes and vehicles and destroyed entire areas of crops as hailstones the size of tennis balls came raining down like missiles at 80 to 100 kilometers per hour. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. And oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. Fact. 6 of Canada's 10 costliest disasters have happened in the province of Alberta. With how expensive this rang in at, let's grab some perspective right now by looking at some of the other events while considering where this one ranks. It will come as no surprise to anyone that the most expensive natural disaster on record was the 2016 Fort McMurray wildfire, which cost nearly $4 billion. That started by the stark inactivity of any weather and then was fueled by the sudden involvement of a ton of wind. The next costliest in Alberta history was the 2013 flooding that put downtown Calgary and much of southern Alberta underwater, and it cost just over $3.5 billion. And remember to subscribe to this podcast because on June 19th, you will be reminded that the next episode that is ready for you to listen to is indeed the story of the 2013 flooding that submerged towns, highways, the Calgary Stampede grounds, and actually several rows up in the lower bowl of the Saddle Dome. So how regular are hailstorms in Alberta? Very. Alberta, and especially the foothills and Calgary, are known in Canada as the hail capital of the country. You can thank the topography of the Rockies for that, and when paired with the prevailing microsystems that creep over from BC and the runway of prairie land that stretches out from there, Alberta Power went so far as to say that it is clear that Canada has seen a persistent increase in the frequency of major storms over the past decade. And if you are in the foothills of Alberta, that will mean hail every time. It might be time to consider the reevaluation of urban city planning and not build where these storms hit the hardest repeatedly. Otherwise, we will see more budget-busting and economy-paralyzing floods and hailstorms like what we witnessed to the tune of over $1 billion this day in weather history. Tomorrow is June 14th, and we are sticking in the top 10 of the most impactful Canadian natural disasters when we look back at number 9. It was the 1892 Quebec tornado. Not familiar with that one? Neither was I. But for it to still be in the National Natural Disaster Top 10, spanning 2 centuries, there has to be one hell of a story there. And there is. And we're going to get to it tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.